is Katische Haberfield. She's a spiritual regression therapist and she's a specialist in spirit releasement therapy.
I came across a lovely husband and wife team who were doing some energy healing. And so I went in with their groups and I really enjoyed their energy healing, and they did some private sessions with groups as well. And so I was in the private session group, and they're the kind of people who can see past lives just instantaneously. So they tap into your energy field, do quantum healing, understand your past lives. So they did some pretty spot on past life reveals that I then was driven to go and do my own Akashic records to prove them, because they were so spot on and they were things that I thought that were me my entire life. But one of the things that happened was that I won a session that was a private one-on-one session with this particular lady. And I said to her about this energy situation and how people were reacting to me. And she said, in this session, she's like, okay, we have a past life possession. And she tried to get rid of this past life possession, and it involved putting hands like here and under the jaw and doing a forcible thing. And she said to me, you've had this possession since birth. You've worked symbiotically. You've been a team. She said you're having trouble releasing him because you work together. You're like twins. And he doesn't want to go and you don't want him to go. So you have to really help me let him go. And I'm like, no, I really want him to go now. And so I said to her, who is this person? And she's like, well, I hate to tell you this, but he's really quite negative. We would call him a black magician or a sorcerer. I'm like, doesn't sound like me. I've never dabbled in witchcraft. I've never been interested in witchcraft. I've never been interested in spells. I've never been interested in anything like that. Why would I host black magician or sorcerer? And she said, I don't know how to say this to you, but in 40 years of doing this, I've never met anybody as so power hungry and evil as him. And I was like, wow, okay. This is interesting. Anyway, so he went away, and I felt good. And then I actually interviewed a lady on my podcast a few months later, and she works with ghosts. She calls herself the ghost helper, not the ghost hunter. So she works with earthbound spirits. And we did this amazing interview. And at the end of it, she's a lovely lady, but she's ex-military. So she's very straight to the point. And she was like, I want a copy of the file, and I'm going to put the audio and video on my podcast and YouTube as well. I was like, okay, all right. Never had that before, And I tried to send her the file, and I tried so many times, and she was getting very frustrated at me, like I was trying to avoid sending the file. And I said, no, look, here's a screenshot of all the times I've tried to send you this file. And she said to me, okay, I see that we do have interference here. And I said to her, funny that, because I wonder if it's my dude come back. This, and I told her the story, and I said, it's a black magician, sorcerer. He's been with me since birth. We tried to get rid of him once, but I feel like he is blocking and he's come back. And so I had a session with her just via the phone from America, and she did like an exorcism to get rid of him. And it was a very in-depth process, very intense. And to be frank and fair, I told her he was a black magician and sorcerer. So that was the information that she had. So she already had her defenses up. She has dealt with a lot of stuff from the military side of things in dealing with dark force entities. And so she was prepared for this monstery person.
Can I just make a couple of comments there? Like, there's what you tell her, but like, she's free to go and gather her information herself. So
yeah, true.
We know as therapists, there's the presenting issue and the real issue. And so anytime anyone tells me anything about their things, I take it with a grain of salt or a starting point, and I go and find out for myself. And just also, like, while we're on this, I think it's really interesting for people to notice. So how does spirit releasement even become an issue? And a lot of times it is when people work with the occult in some way, and it can be black magic, white magic, accidentally getting involved in it. But in your case, it's like, well, I had really never been involved or interested in any of this whatsoever. But this is where past lives become so important to spirit releasement. It's like, well, I've never dabbled in any of this. How would I have picked up an attachment? Well, you could easily, in fact, most people will have at some point in some past life have dabbled in it. Hence, you can pick it up that way. So I think it's a really interesting thing for people to know.
Yeah, so she tried to get his story and tried to talk to him, and it didn't work. And in the end, she used force, and started calling him, a coward, to try and provoke him.
Okay.
Which, and he went. It was a great big thing for both of us. But at the end, to be honest, and I have great, she's a friend of mine. So all due respect, we all have different methods. She achieved the outcome, but I felt violated in the end. I felt like there was something wrong in the way that it was released, because I really wanted to know the story and we didn't get to the story, and I felt like something was done wrong. Something wrong. I felt disrespected. At the end of it, I felt lost for a few days, because I was like, well, this is me now without this other entity that I've operated with for so long, and I had to re-find who I was.
Absolutely. That's a huge thing, by the way. That's another reason to really get the true story, because there's the integration and post process, and a lot of times what Katische is saying here is that this was here with me from birth, and you've been working symbiotically together. That's a very important statement. So that if you're going to rip out half of somebody's being and then say, all right, well, good luck with it now, it's like. And so it's almost like there's if you're born with a conjoined twin or something and one of them doesn't make it, and it's the kind of thing where like you want to have a ceremony and a kind of a funeral in which there's an anger at it, but there's also a sadness and going through a grieving process and a ceremony in which there's all of that kind of thing is very important for a healthy exit and post-release integration.
Absolutely.
So just really remember those. So whenever you're gathering, firstly, gather the information and not just assume based on what someone else has told you, but also like really understand the significance of it. And this is, so a lot of people might think, oh, an attachment came along, it's been there for a few weeks or months or whatever, it's just clinging on. But when they have been such a significant part of someone's life, and in this case, it's a past life, it can be a fragment or it can be a past life personality, that it's integral to the person. And so you have to deal with it as such. It's not something you just cut out and flush out. This ongoing integration is a really important part of spirit releasement therapy. And that's actually, it's just to make a quick distinction. A lot of times spirit releasement therapy is just simply finding a fairly random entity and releasing it. And I would call that simple releasement. And that's what a lot of people think SRT, spirit releasement therapy, is, because that's all they've ever done. But these symbiotic relationships that go on for decades are a significant portion of complex spirit releasement therapy. And people need to understand the difference between a randomish one that's around for a little while, causing a bit of mischief, but that's quite different to these symbiotic ones that have really been an inherent part of people's identity. So when you take them off, they really have this thing, like you said, I'm not quite sure who I am. Am I a sound healer or not? And a lot of these things, am I a really driven corporate person, which you used to be? And then, that people can really flip on the other side and be really, and like you said, be lost, be confused about who they are. So a lot of spirit releasement therapy is, and I'm finding this even more recently, is that you spend the 3 sessions getting for 3 or 4 sessions, getting really detailed stories from the entity. But I'm now doing a number of sessions as ongoing therapy to help people rediscover and be their identity, and to unravel all of these aspects where is that me or was it the entity, and all of those confusions. And if that's been part of their daily life for decades, there's quite a bit of work there, and it's really important work to continue to do. And it's certainly, that's completely different to going in, grabbing it and throwing it out in 5 minutes. We're talking about, tens of hours of ongoing coaching and therapy.
Yeah, because for me it was then disassociating the fear with having an attachment, because immediately one of the things that I teach my clients is you can't just become fearful about the attachment. You have to understand the lessons behind it. And as you were just saying, since that person was removed, I've then had to actually spend a lot of time, and I've only just recently learnt the story, going back into past lives and understanding why, what he was, his story, who he was in my past, why he was seen to be an angry dark force entity, and learn that story. And actually, his story, it took me a very, very, very long time to be ready to learn that story. I had to do a lot of other regressions before I was able to access that one. I had seen snippets of the story over many different times. So many times, so I would use like your recordings to try and do things by myself in between, go to my own practitioner. And I had seen snippets of his lifetime that were very, 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 very vivid to me. And it wasn't until I was actually ready to go in and find the reason that I then could piece together, in fact, that he had been with me, my soul, not just for my incarnation, but many, many, many incarnations. And that's what I'm finding in a lot of my spirit releasement cases, is that somebody attaches and they go with them incarnation after incarnation after incarnation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's quite complex then, because it's not just the one personality, it's all of your personalities for several hundreds to thousands of years that have all had this person influencing their personality, and they're like, well, who am I and who are you? And
Yeah, that's a great point. And so, as a teacher of spirit releasement therapy, I find people will often come to me and say, teach me how to make the spirits go. And if it's simple, maybe, but I really only teach the complex ones. And I find that you can't really do spirit releasement therapy without doing past life regression therapy. And what you're saying here as well is it's not even just that you have to know the basics of past life regression. You have to be able to do process a series of lives sometimes in order to be able to get to the significant one. You have to peel off so many layers of the onion before you can get to the core of it. And that can, and part of what that can do, so I heard you talking about that past life, and so you were uh, uh, an evil sorcerer apparently, and we can then be very judgmental and labeling of that person. But in that past life, you found out, well, he was doing his best and he was wanting to help, and was was tortured and abused, and had good reason to be angry and frustrated, and so then you can go and do the healing to that person, and then that transform them from an angry person to a person who's to able to and to see the good in them. And so you go in without labeling them, and finding that out, and doing healing on that person. And then and then it's because of that, then they're able to release. But you have to do that healing on that entity, or on that aspect. And so that you have to use the hypnosis, hypnotherapy, or you're doing regression to the cause of an issue. So hypnotherapists will be familiar with this, but you're really just doing it on that past life personality. And then once you've cleared all that way, then you can do some of the formal process of spirit releasement. But if you haven't done that prerequisite preparation, then good luck. You're going to have real trouble with the really complex ones.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a really interesting situation to be able to understand, I guess, compassion for yourself and for others, and to deal with and transmutate emotions, and go through that healing process. And because he was an alchemist, what I love about that is that through the work that we do in all of the spiritual releasement and regression therapies, is we're alchemizing emotions, and releasing and changing and creating new pathways for people by looking at root causes, and reframing. We are alchemists. That is what we do. We're helping people access the mind stream of all times, finding issues, showing them new perspectives, giving them healing, reframing, allowing them to move past and forward in the future. And that is, in my mind, transformation, which is alchemy.
Yeah.
Alchemy is not just changing metals into gold.
Yeah.